Some of you might remember a movie from 1986 called River's Edge. This movie had quite a bit of impact on me as a youngster. I think this was one of the pivotal moments, seeing this film, that is, where I sort of became aware of the fact that I wasn't going to be a normal, happy person. And so I must be one of these kids, one of these screwed up stoner rocker kids, Iron Maiden t-shirt wearing, cigarette, weed smoking, troublemaking losers, I suppose. But it was the first time I saw Crispin Glover, I think, on film, and Keanu Reeves, who both gave, I thought, very good performances. If exaggerated and kind of ridiculous when viewed in hindsight. But I never thought Keanu Reeves was a great actor anyway. In fact, I think he's pretty terrible. Don't get me wrong, I love The Matrix. It's one of my favorite movies. But, let's face it, his role in that movie is, on the level of like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator. But see, in this movie, I kind of got the feeling that he was just being himself. Like, hey, right on, dude. Like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure kind of, personality, but without the humor, the real life version of it. And I thought he did it. I thought it was one of his best roles, actually. Dennis Hopper is also in this movie. So anyway, this kid here, who ended up being in a lot of other movies, he plays a kid that murders a girl who's laying dead right here in the photo of the film. And after he kills her, he starts telling all his friends about it. As if like he doesn't have any remorse, and he's just like, and his friends are like, they're creeped out, but they go check it out, and they don't call the cops, and they're kind of talking to each other like, well, should we do something? Maybe we should. I don't know. And then this character here, Crispin Glover's character, is kind of like, no, we got to protect our buddy. We got to hide the body, bro. And he's trying to help him out the whole time. And so Dennis Hopper's character, Dennis Hopper plays a much older guy, obviously, because Dennis Hopper was older than these actors. And he sort of, buddies up with this guy here, and they sort of have like killer to killer chats. And what ends up happening is we see that Dennis Hopper is sort of a generation that, while they had their hoodlums and outcasts and even murderers, there was a certain code of honor, or perhaps remorse for what... Dennis Hopper has remorse for what he did, and he misses his wife that he shot and killed. And we get all that in gory detail. And but he looks at this kid, and he's kind of like, wow, this kid just has no remorse. He's just like a new generation of murderer. He's nothing like me. And he ends up shooting him. He ends up killing him in the end. So whatever, grandiose statements you want to take from that, what I really found interesting was that this is based inspired by a true story, which I never really knew anything about. And I was just kind of randomly doing some research this morning, and I don't know what, I stumbled across it, and I started reading about the real story, and I thought it was kind of interesting, so I thought I'd talk about that a little bit here. In early November 1981, Anthony Broussard raped and strangled Mary Conrad at his home in Milpitas, California. The boy was large for his age, and though he's frequently described as having a gentle demeanor in news reports, Broussard was reportedly troubled ever since finding his mother dead in the shower after coming home from elementary school. Conrad reportedly ran with a bad crowd, a group at school who had called themselves the Stoners, and she frequently ran away from home. Conrad's mother had reported that the girl had run away the day before her death. After the murder, Broussard loaded Conrad's body in his pickup truck and made his way into the hills surrounding town, dumping her remains in the bottom of a ravine. After hiding the body, Broussard told several classmates about his crime, many of whom did not believe him, and to verify his act, Broussard guided groups of kids to the body as proof. As word of the body spread, at least 13 kids filed out into the hills to see Broussard's grisly work. Witnesses included Conrad's former boyfriend, who brought his 8-year-old brother in tow. Reactions varied. Some poked at the body with sticks like curious children. Others thought it was a mannequin, a bad joke. They goaded each other into touching the body. They removed patches from her half-removed jeans. And one 16-year-old, Kirk Rasmussen, covered her body in plastic bags and leaves to give Broussard a head start on the police. Most simply went about their day and pretended that nothing was wrong. As witnesses to the scene piled up, the crime still went unreported. Some were haunted by what they saw, unable to shake images of Marcy's body throughout the day, while others stood by Broussard, protecting a peer who had gone wacko. Others said they didn't go to the police simply because they didn't want to get themselves into trouble. Regardless of their half-baked reasons, Conrad's murder went unreported for 2 days. On the second day, 2 of the witnesses went to the authorities, one to the high school principal, the other to the police. Several of those who remained quiet vilified those who reported the crime, deriding them as snitches with no moral center. Even after Broussard's arrest, several of the teens still refused to cooperate with police, lying about their knowledge of the body. When the story finally broke and Broussard went into police custody, Milpitas became the center of a media firestorm, with reporters from across the country swarming into town to get a scoop on Broussard's crime, and on the decayed moral fiber of those who stayed quiet. A 1981 article from the Sarasota Herald-Tribune records many of the teens' reactions, most of them echoing the same chilly reserve. Even homicide detectives put on their case were shaken by the teens' apparent apathy, claiming that the kids must have ice water in their veins. Much of the information above was culled from one of these reporters, Glenn Bunting, who, in his pseudo-review of River's Edge, recounted getting to know many of the teenagers at local hangout spots during the immediate fallout of the murder. There's actually a rather lengthy, detail-laden piece we dug up from an obscure corner of the internet that claims to be from one of Broussard's classmates who saw Conrad's body. The account is utterly unverifiable and could very well be some odd piece of true crime fan fiction, but it's worth at least a browse. Broussard eventually pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to 25 years to life. He is currently in protective custody at Folsom State Prison. Rasmussen, the boy who covered Conrad's body, spent 3 years in a juvenile detention center for helping Broussard's elude the police. He claims he did it out of intimidation and as a way to cover her naked body. River's Edge is far from a true crime story. Screenwriter Neil Jimenez reportedly only took the broad circumstances of the murder as inspiration for his story. But many of the details from the real crime found their way to Jimenez's script. All the characters are largely invented, especially Feck, Dennis Hopper, a local hermit hiding from a similar crime he committed in his youth. But the film captures the sliminess of the circumstances around Conrad's murder and the conflicting attitudes that can arise when confused anti-authoritarian rhetoric and childhood loyalties get put to the test. The best source I found online for what seems to be fairly unbiased information on what really happened here is this site UPI, and you can search Anthony Broussard, which is the name of the alleged murderer. And there's quite a few articles. It's very interesting. If you want to take some time, it's a very interesting dive into this whole story. There's a lot going on with the court case and the media sensationalism. But finding this UPI source is pretty reliable. I don't believe they exist anymore, but they were once a rival of New York Times. This article here, dated July 21st, 1982, the mother of a 14-year-old girl who was murdered and sexually molested by a classmate who bragged about the crime and displayed her corpse to other students, says the youth's guilty plea will allow her to start forgetting. Following a ruling by Superior Court Judge John A. Flaherty that a jailhouse confession would be allowed as evidence, Anthony Jacques Broussard, 17, Tuesday pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, ending his trial, which was still in the jury selection stage. Broussard had been on trial for murder and rape and was accused of attempted rape and attempted molestation in separate incidents with 2 young girls. Those were separate incidences before this murder, apparently. Prosecutor Alan Noodleman said the other charges were dropped in exchange for the plea of guilty to first-degree murder, which carries a maximum penalty of 25 years to life in prison. The previous charges carried a sentence of life in prison with no possibility of parole. In explaining the bargaining, Noodleman said Broussard apparently had sex with the victim, Marcy Conrad, after she was dead. Under the law, you cannot rape a dead person, he said. Noodleman said the two other sex charges would have added only 6 years to Broussard's prison term. Defense attorney Robert Perez said the guilty plea allows his client a chance of parole at an early age after 16 years, 8 months. He added that Flaherty's allowing as evidence testimony from Russell Patrick McNeil, a convict who told police that Broussard strangled the girl and then had sex with the body, played a large part in his decision. The victim's mother, Susan Hooglin, had refused to comment during the ordeal of the crime and trial, which began last week. Maybe now I can start forgetting a little, she said after the guilty plea. She also said her daughter never was romantically involved with the 6'4", 280-pound defendant. The boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, that wasn't true, she said. They were just friends. I knew my daughter, and there was another boy she liked. After the crime last November, Broussard bragged about it to classmates at Milpitas High School. When some of them said they did not believe him, he took them to see the partially nude body in a ravine outside town. Some students admitted throwing rocks at the body. The incident sparked an intensive period of self-examination on the parts of parents and school officials who sought to explain why classmates failed to report the murder to officials. This is Marcy Conrad. This is the real young girl that was murdered by Anthony Broussard. Notice how there's all this emphasis on these stoners, these white stoner dudes, right? And this guy here, Daniel Roebuck, he played the murderer. But what's interesting is the murderer was black, Anthony Jacques Broussard. He was very big. He's a huge guy, 6'4", 280 pounds or whatever they said. There were statements about schizophrenia, talking to dogs, talking to himself, whatever. It's just interesting. I'm getting echoes of Nathan Gale, the guy who murdered Dimebag Darrell. But more than anything, I like to analyze, because with a case like this where there's a lot of details, and this was a long time ago, and it's very difficult to dig up information through Freedom of Information Act requests because a lot of counties destroy records after that much time. That being said, I haven't actually looked into it. Today's the first day I've really looked at this. I don't plan on doing a big research project on this, but without even doing all that, there's some very interesting things we can learn just by looking at how the media responds to incidences like this. And the first thing you can see is a huge focus on these stoner kids and emphasizing this stereotype, like they're the criminals, they're the bad ones. In fact, the Rasmussen guy, who's played by I assume is played by Crispin Glover's character, because this is the guy that's most trying to protect Daniel Roebuck's character, who's playing Broussard. He got 3 years in prison for trying to protect his buddy from getting in trouble, which he probably deserved if that's true. But still, you find in the media, all the emphasis is on these kids. But the thing is, this one guy, this is the murderer right here. I mean, he's the murderer, and it appears to be in cold blood. He didn't seem to have any remorse. Although I have some questions about how his guilt was determined, because it doesn't seem like there was any actual physical proof, at least from the media reports, that he actually murdered Marcy Conrad. I'm not saying he didn't, but basically it seems like the court was relying on statements by students and confessions, because Anthony Broussard, he initially pleaded not guilty, as you can see from the articles on UPI. And later, when he pleaded guilty, that was obviously because he was looking at life in prison, or earlier charges taken away, and then 25 to life, which I assume means a minimum of 25 years with a possibility of parole at some point. So obviously, it wasn't looking good for him. So pleading guilty was, the route to go for him. given how the media lies and how you can see the emphasis, how much emphasis was put on these kids, it just makes you wonder what the truth is about this guy, about Anthony Jacques Broussard. Because, in my mental, fantasy world where journalism is very on top of it and aggressive, something like this happens and you get a very detailed article, several very detailed articles from different journalists going way into Anthony Jacques Broussard and his background and why he did it and what caused him to become this way. And, supposedly he found his mother dead when he was 8 years old in his house. And that's the narrative is that's what messed him up. And there's even one article that states Marcy Conrad at one point may have made fun of him for his mom dying. And that might be why he choked her. But that is not presented as fact. It's an anecdote thrown into one of the articles that may or may not be true. You think about today how race is such a big issue, how the media loves jumping on race, especially when it's black-white related race. And I just find it very interesting how this guy's race is never brought up at all. And there's all this emphasis on the stereotypes of these, quote-unquote stoner, white dudes. And I'm not saying this is a case of like reverse racism against white people or something like that, but I'm just making a comparison. I mean, if this happened today and Anthony Jacques Broussard was white and Marcy Conrad was black and everything else was exactly the same and it happened in exactly the same place, just think of all the racial controversy that would be talked about. And I know some people are going to say, well, you're comparing apples to oranges because, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I mean, I just think it's a healthy exercise to think about that when reading an article like this. There's something not right. The fact that there's not really there doesn't seem to be any physical proof linking Anthony Jacques Broussard to the killing. I mean, they could have talked about, handprints around the neck. They probably didn't have DNA, a way to check DNA back then, but, footprints from his shoes. I mean, it sounded like it was very sloppy. I mean, this is a 17-year-old kid. I don't know. Something ain't right about all this. I'm not sure what it is, but I thought it was worth revisiting. And by the way, a quick search online, I think it was first page results, typing the killer's name in Google. This is from cdcr.ca.gov. And look at this. There he is, Anthony Jacques Broussard, April 6, 2023. Grant. What is that grant? Parole. He's out. He got out. I don't see any articles talking about this anywhere. It's kind of weird. Last thing I want to read is this comment by this person named Susan Reynolds, BIL. She commented August 14, 2014. I was a 10th grade student at Milpitas High School when Jacques Broussard murdered Marcy Conrad. From my point of view, it was a shock to myself and most of my friends. I personally did not know either one, but I knew many who did. The atmosphere around campus was shock and disbelief, turning to somberness as the reality of what happened sunk in. I know the following summer I went to Illinois to visit my grandparents, and when people found out I went to Homicide High, they would not allow their teens to associate with me. My cousins stuck up for me and tried to set people straight. Just because I attended Milpitas High did not mean I was a murderer. The sensationalism of the media was so way out there, I do not even know where to start. I think that if this would have happened, say, at Independence High in San Jose, it would not have been so sensationalized. Milpitas was a quiet middle-class community between Fremont and San Jose, and no one ever thought anything like this could happen there at that time. Just a thought to think about. The teen who did this had a reputation of being weird, and no one was really surprised it was him when we were told who it was. And the group of kids who saw the body and did not report were the kids who were already in trouble with authorities and were also afraid to tell. Whether it was in fear of Jacques or authorities, I personally could not say. But either way, we're talking about teens, many high on drugs. They called themselves the stoners, after all. Would you know what to do? Just a thought, the class of 1984 had the highest CAT test scores in the state and the lowest dropout rate on record. Could we all have been juvenile delinquents and achieved this? I say no. So I guess what I was trying to express, most of my classmates were great kids and had to live this tragedy down, a lot due to the sensationalism of the media. And in a school of 1,800 or so students, the few who were actually involved was a vast minority. But we all were stigmatized as bad kids. I remember when I was in my 20s, I had a prospective employer not hire me because I was one of those kids. And this was in Illinois to boot. So just wanted to say my piece and all. I know that most of you who come here don't usually expect real upbeat, happy material. So maybe I don't even really need to say what I'm about to say, but I hate to leave off the year 2024 with such a dark post. So I guess I would just like to reiterate that, you know, I truly do believe that we are all a lot more alike than we are different. And I think the media's goal is to make us feel like we are all very different and that we need to focus on these stereotypes, whether it be racial stereotypes, sexual identity, cultural identity. And, you know, all of these things can be very beautiful things that we should all embrace proudly. But when we embrace those individual attributes to the point where we see our neighbor as like a different species than us, not even human necessarily, and we may not even all realize that we do it when we do. You know, I'm as guilty as anyone, I'm sure. And, you know, the holidays aren't traditionally my favorite time of year, although this year I had a pretty good holiday, so I'm very thankful for that. But historically, the holidays have been a very tough time for me. I didn't have the most functional family for many years, and really still don't. You know, I'll tell you right now, a lot of my friends and my family don't share my views on a lot of stuff, but we find a way to make it work. And one of the reasons that works, and I know this is a fact, is because, you know, I asked myself, well, what can I do to make this work? And what I can do to make this work is just love this person unconditionally, the best I can. I'm not saying I can do it perfectly, but, you know, try to overcome these issues that the mainstream media and the mainstream news is constantly trying to keep fresh in the air and keep the hostility in the air, especially with what's, you know, I don't like to talk politics all the time and religion, but I mean, I feel like it's in my face. It's in your face. I mean, unless you're living with your eyes closed, you know, they're pushing it to you all around. And once I started seeing that it was right in my face watching movies, you know, before I was even politically active, I was just watching these movies and not necessarily picking up on the political and cultural and, you know, the brainwashing and the mind control that was happening. But now that I'm seeing it, I feel like I need to tell everybody. So, you know, I wish you all a happy new year. And if you're having a hard time, I pray that your situation gets better. And I really appreciate your viewership and that you take the time to listen to what I have to say here.